very, very difficult to be creative because you have to get there first. And then even if you do get there, very few people take all of the rewards. You think about Stephen King, for example, right? He's a really good example. It's like half the money in the publishing business goes to Stephen King. And the reason, well, here's why. You know, you go into, think about where people buy books, novels. It's in airports often. And so then you imagine that the geographical territory for the distribution of novels is something like the book rack in front of the bookstores in an airport bookstore, right? So it's this rack that's this big. Number 1 position, that's worth God only knows how much. Number 2 position is worth half that. Number 3 position is worth half that. And by the time you get down to number 50 position, well, you're not doing anywhere near as well as number 1, but you're doing way better than all the other people who are getting 0. And that piece of geographic real estate is replicated at every airport all over the world. And so that number 1 slot, man, that's where all the money goes. It's like the 1% of the people who have 50% of the money. And the 1% of them that have 50% of that money. And the 1% of them that have 50% of that money. The winner takes all. And that's particularly true in a creative domain. The winner takes all. And most people stack up at 0. It's really rough.
So creative people are getting a really rough, they're not getting a break at all. And there are probably more creative people doing non-creative work in the workforce than the other way around.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And you know, the thing is, I don't want to paint too dismal a picture about being creative, because one of the things that pays off big for creative people is that they get to be creative, right? There's great aesthetic joy in that, and depth. And I've been privileged because I've worked with more creative people than would fall to the lot, let's say, of the typical psychotherapist, because people often come and see me because they've watched my videos online, and they deal with people who are interested in those subjects tend to be creative. And one of the things I've really been struck by, first of all, I've learned that, for those of you who are interested in such things, that the reason Jungian psychology works is because it works for creative people. It doesn't work at all for non-creative people. It just falls dead and flat for them. They're not interested in it at all. It isn't how they think.
You mean as therapy?
Yeah, it doesn't match their personalities. Whereas creative people, man, they dream archetypal dreams all the time. It's really interesting. And also they die if they're not being creative. They wither on the vine. I had one client, I really liked him. He was a brilliant architect. And his rational mind was his worst enemy because it just criticized everything. He was hyper-rational, criticized everything, and really in a dark way and effectively, you know. If I could get him to not think and just create, he was a complete genius. He could. That's where all of the vitality in his life was. You know, that's where the sap rose up inside the dead tree that was sort of embedded inside of him. And it's very common with creative people is that it's their lifeblood, and it really is from a biological perspective. This isn't some epiphenomena. It's built right into people. And